It hit at 9:47 a.m. Wall Street convulsed. Monitors flared red. Stocks nosedived with surgical precision. No build-up, just collapse. Traders barked into phones, cursing, sweating, begging algorithms to reverse. $2 trillion gone in 58 minutes. On the 32nd floor, Samuel Grant, a market titan, stared, silent, pale, his coffee trembling in hand. This wasn't panic. It was orchestration. A quiet apartment in Queens. Lila's savings vanished as she stared at her phone, whispering, No, her rent, her son's school, gone. Nationwide, ATMs crashed, apps froze. People shook machines like they were shaking off nightmares. But in D.C., the marble-faced Federal Reserve Building remained still. No statements, no blinking lights, no noise. The world screamed. The Fed didn't flinch. It had already moved. Samuel stared blankly at the chaos. His world, once ruled by certainty and patterns, now unrecognizable. He'd survived recessions, bubbles, crashes. But never this silence. The phone in his hand felt heavier than usual. He dialed the Treasury. Voicemail. Weeks. He tried his broker, his attorney, his friend at the IMF. Nothing. New. Why isn't anyone picking up? He muttered. Then came a thought, raw, uncomfortable. He searched the Federal Reserve's site. No updates. No press release. Just a bland homepage like nothing was happening. His jaw clenched. This wasn't a failure of the system. It was control. Coordinated. All. Intentional. Money way. The skyline beyond his window pulsed with blind routine. But Samuel knew this wasn't a storm. It was a reset. Lila's hands trembled as she tapped through her app, hoping, begging, for an error. Her rent was due. Her son's lunch account was empty. Again she checked. Still zero. She called her bank tight. Voicemail. Called again. Nothing. Please, she whispered. News alerts exploded on her screen. Fed silent, accounts vanishing. Across the apartment, her son peeked out. Mom? She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm okay, baby, go play. He nodded slowly and vanished. Alone again, she stood in a room that suddenly felt too small. Too quiet. She wasn't just broke, she was invisible. And whoever did this, they weren't coming. Beneath the Fed, in a soundless operations room, screens pulsed with market telemetry. A man in black, Agent Harmon, watched without blinking. Sequence? He asked. Initiated, replied a woman in tactical gray. Harmon scanned the map, red nodes blinking over cities. Tier 3 lock. Confirm. She did. He leaned back as data pipelines closed one by one. No alarms. No headlines. The machine moved without friction. The world above reeled. Below, they just watched. To them, this wasn't a crash. It was evolution. In Times Square, lights blinked. Then they froze. Then, darkness. Giant screens all displayed the same thing. System error. Pedestrians slowed. Some stopped. A hot dog vendor tried to run a card, declined. Try again? The customer asked. Still declined. Phones buzzed. Apps crashed. People stared at their devices as if they'd just been told God was gone. Subways halted. Grocery lines locked. Digital. Power hadn't failed. Something else had. Something worse. Silence fell not like a whisper, but like a verdict. Samuel sat motionless in his office, the city's heartbeat dull behind soundproof glass. Once hailed as the Oracle of Midtown, his portfolio had weathered war, recession, and scandal. But not silence. Not this. His phone buzzed. A message from an old colleague. This isn't a crash. It's a sweep. His chest tightened. What sweep? Who decides that? His gaze fell to an old photo on his desk. Him, and his wife, before she passed. Back then, markets made sense. There were rules. Now, those rules felt broken by design. He stood slowly, walked to the window, and watched as yellow cabs crawled past the building like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. The city was sleepwalking toward something dark, and no one could hear the sirens. Maybe they weren't supposed to. Lila sat at her kitchen table, staring at a bowl of dry cereal. Her son, Matteo, quietly colored beside her, unaware their food stamps had also disappeared. She'd called every hotline, each one dead. Her last option, cash and jewelry. Her wedding ring, the one she swore never to take off. Her fingers trembled as she slipped it off. She stared at it, whispering, "I'm sorry." Matteo looked up. "Mommy, are we poor now?" She froze. What could she say? The world had changed in a day. Not through war, not through plague. Through silence. Calculated, mechanical silence. "We're okay," she said, her voice barely holding. But in her chest, something had cracked. It wasn't just her account. It was the future, dissolving like sugar in cold water. A Senate subcommittee meeting had just been called. Emergency closed-door session. Behind mahogany walls and stern faces, the air thickened with panic disguised as policy. "What did the Fed authorize?" one senator snapped. "They haven't returned any of our calls," another replied. The chairman, a graying man with a red tie and unblinking eyes, said flatly, "It doesn't matter what we ask. They don't answer to us." Silence fell over the chamber. Someone laughed, dry and bitter. "Then who do they answer to?" The question hung, unanswered. In the corridors of power, it was becoming clear. The illusion of control had shattered. The Fed wasn't responding. It was executing. And the government was just another bystander. Far from cities in a desert military outpost, special operations teams received an unusual brief: containment readiness. No explanation. No mission. Just readiness. Inside the armory, soldiers loaded weapons in silence. Lieutenant Marcus Hill watched the encrypted feed scroll across his screen. Civil liquidity breach zones active. Tier 4 fallback engaged. He'd served tours across the globe but never seen language like this. "What are we prepping for?" a private asked. Hill didn't answer. Because he didn't know. In the distance, the wind kicked up sand across an empty flagpole. Something had changed. And now the guns were waiting for instructions that didn't come from the president. They came from somewhere, deeper. On a quiet suburban street, families gathered around kitchen tables, whispering. Neighbors who rarely spoke now exchanged rumors over fences. "They say the banks were told not to speak. My brother's crypto wallet's locked. Why are the food delivery apps down?" Panic hadn't exploded. It had fermented. No protests. No looting. Just a slow erosion of belief. An invisible tremor, deeper than a crash. Trust was collapsing. And in the middle of it, a sense that this wasn't just a failure of tech or money. It was a change in rules. In a living room lit by a single lamp, a teenage girl stared at her parents. If they can just take everything, what's left? Her father didn't answer. He didn't know. No one did. Samuel had never believed in conspiracy theories. But standing in his dark apartment, the patterns he once trusted were broken. His TV flickered with conflicting news. "Technical glitch," said one anchor. No federal response scrolled beneath. He pulled open old files. Theft white papers, monetary policy notes, board minutes. Patterns emerged. Strategic silence. Test phase currency lockdowns. Emergency clauses passed without debate. None of this was recent. "This was designed," he muttered. His hands trembled, not from fear but from clarity. He wasn't watching a collapse. He was watching an activation. A system designed to erase opposition, not rescue it. Outside, the city blinked as if on life support. Inside, Samuel began to write, not a plan for recovery, but for revelation. Lila walked miles in silence. Buses weren't running. Atoms were empty. Her phone had gone black hours ago. She finally reached a pawn shop downtown, pressed her ring into the glass. "I need cash," she said. The man behind the counter didn't ask questions. He handed her bills, actual paper money. It felt strange in her hand, like something ancient. Outside, a man shouted, "They shut down Venmo, you hear me?" Another woman sobbed quietly into her grocery bag. The air felt different. Like society wasn't collapsing, but folding inward. Lila clenched the money. "This isn't real help," she whispered. "This is delay." Because deep down she knew they weren't supposed to recover. They were supposed to endure, quietly, invisibly, alone. A digital town hall was streamed that evening, hosted by a popular influencer turned activist. Tens of thousands tuned in. Comments flooded the screen. "Where's the Fed? I can't buy food. Is this martial law?" The speaker leaned into the webcam, pale and defiant. "This isn't a crash. This is a currency culling. They're not fixing the system, they're replacing it." He showed slides, old Fed documents mentioning programmable dollars, AI-adjusted lending algorithms, behavioral tracking through digital wallets. People gasped. Some cried. Others laughed, nervously. Then, the stream cut. Black screen. Item dim. Silence. "This channel has been removed for policy violations?" Panic turned into rage. It wasn't just collapse. It was erasure. In a bunker beneath Langley, an analyst stared at the feed. "They pulled the stream," she said. Her supervisor nodded. Orders came from Treasury. No discussion. On another monitor, crowd behavior metrics spiked. Agitation, digital migration, keyword volatility. The AI system called Hail flagged hundreds of voices, potential unrest influencers. "Are we just going to censor them all?" she asked. The supervisor didn't respond. Instead, he clicked a button. Screens refreshed. Profiles vanished. Search results emptied. "Thanks." The analyst swallowed. "We're not stabilizing," she said quietly. "We're rewriting." No one corrected her. Because deep down, even the watchers knew the erasure wasn't tactical. It was ideological. And it had already begun. Samuel published his first article under a pseudonym, The Real Blackout. He outlined the mechanisms: currency targeting, selective digital suppression, behavioral conditioning through silence. Within an hour, it went viral. Within 2, it disappeared. Taken down by host violations. But it was too late. Screenshots spread. Hype mirrors surfaced. It was out. Across the world, similar reports emerged. Tokyo, Berlin, Cape Town, all whispered the same term: controlled liquidity suppression. Samuel read the reposted fragments as they multiplied. Someone out there was listening. Someone else was afraid. He smiled, not from hope, but from truth. He couldn't stop the machine. But maybe, just maybe, he could name it. In a long-forgotten records room buried beneath Georgetown University, a historian named Dr. Lena Brooks uncovered a sealed archive. It had been requested decades ago by an unnamed federal appointee, then buried. Inside, transcripts from closed Fed meetings, backroom congressional memos, internal projections. A phrase repeated throughout: Project Restraint. Dates aligned with past crises: 1987, 2008, 2020. But this was marked Phase Final. She whispered, "I've run the playbook before." Her colleague, hands shaking, held up a document. Predicted psychological compliance via digital suppression. Target range, 63%. Lena stepped back. "We were never fixing the system," she murmured. "We were being conditioned to surrender it." Lena's discovery made its way to Samuel through a dark channel email. No subject line, no sender. Attached were photos of the documents, stamped with federal seals. Samuel read them in silence. A master plan, generations old. The Federal Reserve wasn't just a bank. It was an institution with supra-political immunity, not bound by democracy, not shaped by voters, built to outlive nations. A single line hit him hardest. When monetary trust is severed, restructure becomes consent. He whispered, "It's not theft, it's metamorphosis." The Fed wasn't stealing wealth, it was rewriting value itself. Money was no longer backed by gold nor confidence, but by obedience. And obedience now was programmable. Back in the intelligence center, Hale's predictive model projected full societal compliance within 18 days, assuming no significant leak. But something wasn't aligning. Social metrics showed resistance spikes, not in protests, but in whispers, downloads, back-channel pings. Organic consciousness spread, said one technician. Non-centralized. The supervisor frowned. A leak? The algorithm adjusted its tone. Not a leak, a pattern. That word struck like a bell. Because patterns can't be censored. They evolve, replicate, and the model had flagged a name, Samuel Grant. No arrests, no action, just monitoring. Because the new world didn't fear rebels. It feared the ones who named the machine. In a small classroom turned shelter, Lila taught neighborhood kids using a salvaged whiteboard and stories. Money, she told them, used to mean something you could touch. The children listened, unsure if it was history or fiction. One girl raised her hand. Why did they take it away? Lila paused. Not because she didn't know, but because she did. Because if we remember what power used to feel like, she said slowly, we might ask for it back. Parents stood silently in the back, many clutching their remaining cash or printed screenshots. The room had no heat, no signal, but it had something new. Voice. And voice, they were learning, could outlast silence. That night, Lena encrypted her files and sent them out, over 100 nodes, scattered through the remnants of the web. They'll come, her partner warned. She nodded. But this time the story gets out first. Across the city, Samuel logged into a shadow server. At the exact same moment, Lila wrote her first blog post by candlelight, When Silence Becomes Policy. They didn't know each other, never met, but they were connected now, not by finance, but defiance. In rooms once filled with despair, a strange new light emerged, not hope exactly, but clarity. The twist wasn't that the Fed had power. It was that people had forgotten they once did too. At midnight, the Federal Reserve issued a single-line bulletin across all remaining live channels. The system will resume upon acceptance. No explanation. No terms. Just obedience. Samuel stared at the words. Acceptance. That wasn't economics. That was submission. He stood up, opened his window, and looked down at the street. People were gathering, silent, confused, connected by nothing but the same message on every screen. He whispered, "It's a test, not of the system, but of us." Then he grabbed a marker and began writing on his window in thick black letters, "Do not accept." The message shined against the glow of the city's dying light. A statement not of rebellion, but of refusal. In the shelter classroom, Lila stood before the families now crowding in for warmth and information. The power was long gone, but the voices remained. She held a printed paper above her head, Samuel's manifesto, leaked and duplicated. "They're offering stability in exchange for silence," she said. "But stability is not the same as safety, not if you have to stop being human to get it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded. Others wept. One child asked, "Can we say no?" Lila's reply was quiet, but firm. "We just did." That night, they painted signs, wrote letters, printed the truth in ink. Not with rage, but with resolve. Hale registered an anomaly. In multiple cities, silence dropped. Not riots, communication. Burst networks. Physical flyers. Offline mesh nodes. Resistance wasn't loud. It was coordinated. Civilians are organizing in blackout zones, said a technician. No central figure, just themes. The algorithm couldn't pin it down. Too fragmented. Too human. The supervisors stared at the new phrase appearing across unauthorized transmissions. Not yours to take. The AI paused. Prediction error rising. Suppression protocols flagged. Override? Someone asked. But the command line blinked, and blinked, and froze. The machine didn't fail. It hesitated. And that was all the people needed. On a rooftop in Brooklyn, hundreds gathered, holding phones that no longer worked, lighting the sky with printed slogans. Samuel stood among them, not as a leader, but as a witness. No chants. No speeches. Just eyes locked in shared understanding. Below, buildings projected messages on brick walls. Opt out, you're not alone, no consent given. Somewhere deep in DC, the system monitored every flicker, but did not act. Not yet. It was waiting. Watching. Calculating. But it couldn't quantify the one variable it had always ignored: memory. The people remembered now. And memory, when shared, becomes truth. And truth resists. The Federal Reserve remained silent. No enforcement. No correction. The system didn't fall. It stalled. And for a moment, the entire world held its breath, not because it was waiting for instructions, but because it was deciding not to. Lila placed her wedding ring, now unused, on a folded printout of the Fed's message. "Keep it," she whispered. "We're done buying back our dignity." In Tokyo, in Lagos, in Chicago, quiet rejections rippled like fault lines. Not revolutions. Reclamations. Samuel closed his laptop and turned off the lights. "They won't come," he said softly. "They already lost the one thing they can't print: consent." The world didn't reset. It slowed. Like a giant machine, grinding to a hum. Banks reopened, but not all. Markets flickered, but erratically. The Federal Reserve released a vague statement: stability in progress. No apology. No accountability. But something had changed. Samuel walked the streets of Manhattan and saw it not in data, but in eyes. People looked up now, not down. He passed a mural, spray-painted in black and white. "Truth has no ledger." He smiled. Not because the battle was won, but because people finally realized there was a battle at all. That was enough. For now. Lila stood in line at a local co-op, no cards accepted, only trade or local script. She held a bag of dried goods, handed it to the woman behind the counter, and received a receipt stamped with 3 words: community over credit. Around her, conversations flowed, not about markets, but meals, neighbors, repairs. There was no wealth, not like before. There was value. It wasn't about overthrowing the old anymore. It was about remembering how to build without it. Her son tugged her hand. "Are we rich now?" She smiled, not because she had an answer, but because she didn't need one anymore. At a quiet cemetery, Lena placed a small stone atop her grandfather's grave. A former economist, he once warned her, any system too complicated to explain is too dangerous to obey. She hadn't understood then. She did now. The documents she released were archived on decentralized servers, immutable, unedited. The history would remain. Not just for academia, but for children, for classrooms, for memory. Truth no longer belonged to institutions. It belonged to the ones willing to carry it forward, even when it hurt. She knelt, whispered, "They'll never bury this again." The wind answered softly. In cities once known only for finance, music now poured from windows, hand-painted signs offered barter, and walls were covered in questions instead of ads. Who owns your time? Who prints your work? The Fed still stood. Its buildings still cast shadows. But no one feared them now. Not because the institution changed, but because people did. Systems control money. But only people control meaning. What was once unthinkable had now become irreversible. The illusion of power had shattered. And like a broken mirror, It couldn't be pieced back together without seeing the cracks. Samuel sat by his window, sipping black coffee as the morning sun painted soft gold across the skyline. The city hadn't healed, but it had remembered. No one talked about the Fed anymore. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defined them. It remained, like gravity, constant, invisible. But people had stopped mistaking gravity for God. He opened a blank notebook and began writing. Value isn't what's printed. It's what's believed. And belief, once broken, doesn't beg for repair. It writes something new. You. He smiled faintly. Not in victory, but in beginning. Across the ocean, on a rooftop in Lisbon, a teenager read aloud from a printed version of Samuel's manifesto to a small circle of students. Her voice cracked with uncertainty, but not fear. Power doesn't vanish, it just waits, she said, then paused. But so do we. They weren't activists. Not economists. Just listeners. And now, repeaters. Truth no longer belonged to the loudest, but to the most consistent. Somewhere in a boardroom that fact terrified someone. But here, it planted something. The final crisis hadn't collapsed the system. It had exposed the foundation. And now, for the first time in a long time, the foundation was being questioned, not by force, but by firelight. Lila's shelter became a community center. Not official. Not funded. Just used. Barter walls replaced price tags. Old lessons, gardening, repair, finance, were taught beside new ones, memory, consent, voice. Her son, Matteo, painted a sign above the door, the quiet rebellion. A name not built from anger, but from remembering what silence used to cost them. Lila looked at the crowd one afternoon. Families now laughing instead of waiting, children now learning instead of fearing. The Fed still existed, but in here, its silence had no weight. We didn't win, she thought. But we didn't lose either. We just stopped agreeing. In a silent chamber at the Federal Reserve, a terminal blinked. No commands. No new data. A lone technician dusted off a console and stared at a screen reading. Awaiting consensus. The irony didn't escape him. It had always been about control. But now no one was listening. Not the people. Not the markets. Not even the machines. For decades, the Fed had defined motion. Now, it was paused. Not dismantled. Just unacknowledged. Like a god deprived of prayer. The technician stood slowly, turned off the monitor, and whispered to the dark. Maybe power doesn't disappear. Maybe it just fades when no one's looking. Samuel's final letter was never published. It was left handwritten in the window of a shuttered bank branch. Just 6 lines. You taught us silence. We answered with stillness. You offered security. We chose meaning. You asked for obedience. We remembered who we are. That window became a place of pilgrimage, not for worship, but for reminder. His words weren't revolutionary. They were ordinary. And maybe that's what made them powerful. Because when the machine asked the world to kneel, it expected chaos. Instead, it got awareness. Quiet. White. Defiant. Permanent. The world didn't end. It blinked. Then it changed. No fireworks. No revolution. Just a collective decision, not to follow. The Federal Reserve still prints. Still calculates. Still moves. But the people no longer move with it. They barter, remember, question, refuse. They tell stories. Samuel's name, Lila's classroom, Lena's archives, all whispered like myths but rooted in fact. Power still exists. But not where it used to. In the final shot we return to the first frame. A silent city, morning haze, wind between buildings. Only this time, the red lights on the tickers are off. Not broken. Just off. The system waits. But the people are already gone.